wow.
Let me think. We have a total of 16, so they're parked all over Rochester. So mostly early cars. Most of my interest has been in early 78, 79s, along with some of the earlier S cars from Europe. So I got a couple 80s in here as well. This was my first car, 78, silver with black and blue Porsche. Needs some fuel line work, so I've been working on the fuel lines. This car here, 79, bought it on Long Island, trailered it home. As you can see, it has the updates, which is a very common thing in the early 80s, was to update the car to S specs, which means they would add the front spoiler, the S wheels, and the rear spoiler as well. Now, of course, like we talked about earlier, the purity of design is what everyone wants, so you want to take those spoilers off, you want to go back to phone dials. This is a 1980 Euro S 5-speed, so it's got the 4.7, 310 horsepower. It's original paint, it's the back metallic. Beautiful car. Has a pretty interesting history. It was owned by the president of Atlantic Records in Europe. So what they call the Unistoff. It's a cloth interior with leather sides. Pretty immaculate. No cracks in the dash. Original radio. Thing's an absolute beast to drive. Up on the left, this is 78. It's a U.S. car. It's Minerva blue, has a Porsche interior that's currently out at Bob Budd's getting redone. If you want to see a car that has original finish on the phone dials, this is the original finish. It's more of a satin, it's not shiny. Never been refinished.
What do you know about the Weissach axle?
Just a little bit that was advanced ahead of its time, would toe in a little bit to prevent you from oversteering in the middle of a turn. As we all know, the Achilles heel of the 911 is, oversteer, lift throttle oversteer. So the engineers went a little bit out of their way to try and prevent that. Orange car is it's an original Continental orange car. I verified that with Porsche. It's a single mirror. You can see from the side. It has a repaint on it, which is a good 10-footer repaint, but it'll be a nice car once we go through it, and the brakes are currently locked, so it's difficult to move this one around. Most 78s do not have rub strips. I don't think I've ever seen a 78 from the factory with rub strips. The early cars also didn't have a sunroof, and believe it or not, most of the early cars also had a 5-speed. That ratio changed. It was probably 90% 5-speeds in the first couple years. By the 90s, it was probably the other direction. Only about 5 to 10% were 5-speeds, and the rest were. The first 400 cars built had no side indicators at all. So those are the smoothest looking ones you can find. Right now, I believe there's 3 known Continental Orange cars in the world. So one is in South Africa, one Jim Dore knows about in, I believe it's in Virginia, and then there's mine. And mine's the only one that we know of with Porsche. So that makes it kind of a very unique car. I really don't know the history of it. I did verify with Porsche that it was ordered Continental Orange with black and blue Porsche, so if you're a Syracuse fan, it might be worth a little bit more. Here we have a 1988 S4. It's night green metallic. It's the only one you will ever see. It's the only one ordered in this color. It was a paint-to-sample car called gray-green interior in it. Sport seats, heated sport seats, powered sport seats, and sport suspension, limited slip. So this car is very interesting. It was built to run, but also be very comfortable. It eats up the miles. It's fast, comfortable. I spent a lot of money getting all the systems to work on this car. The air conditioning works, all the lights work, and everything on it works the way it's intended from the factory. This one is a 1984 chiffon white. It's an S, but so it has a 4.7, but it has an automatic with a 4-speed. Chiffon white was a special order color. It's not particularly rare. There have been a few out there, especially since the article in Panorama about a chiffon car. This car here is another Aero. It's from 1980. Still has the sticker from Dusseldorf, where my mom is actually from, so that sticker's not going anywhere. The paint is shot from being under a tarp, but the interior actually is pretty interesting. It's a tartan cloth interior. The early cars, the first ones were spoilerless. They had no rear spoiler, no front spoiler, no rub strips, like we said, no sunroof. So they're the purest of all design. A lot of them came without the passenger mirror was an option. So sometimes you'll see these cars and you'll just be struck by how pure that original design is. Once they went to the S in 1980 in Europe, that's when they started putting spoilers on, because the car, as the power went up, they needed to keep the car on the ground. So they added the front spoiler, and they also added this rear spoiler, which is a rubber kind of ducktail. So these continued till 86, and then once the S4 came out, that's when they went with the lid spoiler, such as this over here. This is an interesting spoiler. This is from an 87, okay? So even though the car is an 88, it has this 87 spoiler. Only the early 87 spoilers had this, and this is a flip-up spoiler. So that's helps you clean the windshield, access the rear wiper. So it's a highly desirable option, basically, and it only came on the early 87s. A friend of ours that on Run List who actually met some of the original designers and where they got their inspiration, and what they said, this particular fender line, which has always been one of my favorites, it's a very muscular line where the wheel comes over, is actually from a Chevelle 68, 69, I believe. And if you see them side by side, you can actually see that there's some inspiration there. If you go over to the front of the car, where there's this fender line, another one of my favorite lines, just how this whole piece looks. That was inspired by the Mercedes-Benz C111, which was one of their experimental rotary cars. And if you see them side by side as far as pictures, you'll realize that there was a lot of inspiration there as well. And of course the headlights from the Lamborghini Miura are really the only two cars that have their lights facing up in closed position and exposed. Well, in the past 5 years, when I first started, cars would linger on Craigslist for months before selling. You know, even cars that had Porsche 5-speed, early cars, 78, 79s. Now, if you don't have some sort of trigger that you're getting a text when one hits the market, and you call 20 minutes later, it's usually sold, especially something that's a rare color with Porsche or an early car. I'm full, so I don't really hunt as much as I used to, but there's guys out there now. There's a lot of competition for the cars that wasn't there 5 years ago. I have a pretty good collection of early cars in different colors that were relatively rare. There's still a couple on my bucket list. So why 928s in my world? I was looking for something that was well engineered, in my price range, and where the curve of values really hadn't gone up, like the 911s had. I was the perfect age when these came out. I have some recollections of first seeing these on the road and just being astounded, like, what is that? And so once now I'm 50, and I saw that these things had really bottomed out in the market. So I got my first one, and then really got on Run List and started looking at more people that are interested in these, and just started focusing more on color combinations that were pretty rare. I noticed there were a lot of silver, red, black, white cars out there, and just started getting focused on chasing down some of the rarer colors. So that's just became how I accumulated as many as I have. Tony Lapine, who designed the 928, also had a lot to do with the Pacer. So some of the early drawings, there's some crossover there, I would say. My family had a Pacer. We actually had a Pacer X, which is the sport edition of the Pacer. So